In this tutorial, we're going to cover some of the basics of compositing in Adobe After Effects by using this image of a duck with an alpha channel that we had created in a previous tutorial, and this image that I shot on my iPhone of a beach scene up in Maine. So this duck will look as realistic as possible floating along this beach. So the first thing I'll do is I will create a composition with the same dimensions as the beach footage, which is 1920 by 1080. And to do that, the easiest thing to do is to just drop it into the source area of the composition canvas. And now we have a composition that has all the same parameters, the same frame rate, the same raster size, and the same duration as the source media. Now the original source media is 17 seconds long. We don't need that much. We'll just make this a 10-second composition. So I will go into the composition menu, go into composition settings, and I'll just change this number to 10 seconds. And so now I have a 10-second composition. Very first thing I like to do with anything I've shot handheld is stabilize the footage. I will go into the animation menu and I will choose Warp Stabilizer VFX. And it will start, After Effects will start analyzing in the background what it will take to stabilize this image. It wasn't too bad. The optical image stabilization within the iPhone isn't bad at all. So the footage wasn't that shaky, but I do want to take the dramatic moves out of it. So we'll just let that be, and we'll come back in a moment when it's done. So it is now done stabilizing. Of course, I could have continued to work and allowed it to stabilize in the background, but since I have nothing better to do, just let After Effects finish the job and get back to work. So now my job is to bring the duck image into, so let's close out of the effect control. And now I will go back to my composition window and I will drag the duck into the composition as the top layer of the timeline. Let's see what we got. It's a little big, so I will scale it to about 50%. Let's see if that's enough. A little smaller. I'll make it about 35%. Yeah. And now I will roughly position it where I want it to start at the beginning of my animation. So we'll start with the duck positioned, say, here in the animation. And that's all well and good, but we know that a round duck wouldn't float that way in the ocean. Its bottom would be somewhat submerged. What we could do is we could go back into Photoshop and we could cut the bottom of the duck off so it was flat on the bottom. Or we could mask the image here in After Effects so it looks like the duck is submerged, but we still have more of the duck if we want the duck to, say, bob up and down a little bit more naturally in the water. Let's do that. The absolute easiest way to do that is to go to this bottom layer here, the beach, and duplicate this layer. So Control D, I will duplicate it. Now I will move the layer to the top, and it will block everything. So I will open up the rectangle masking tool, and I will start to select the area of the photograph or the video that I want to show against the area I don't want to show. And that's about it. So I've drawn a mask, and if you look, I've added a new parameter. When we carry it down from this layer, you see mask 1. And you have a mode to your masks. This is an additive mask, so it means that whatever I've masked is what I'm actually showing. I could have done it as a subtract mask, and so then only the bottom of the duck would be showing. But I want to leave it as an add, and that's what it is. So let us turn off the mask. We won't look at the mask for now. Let's go back to the duck. And the first thing we'll notice, let's click the background image, is that this is a very hard edge. Let me make the image just a little bit bigger so you can see that as well. Actually, I'll fit it. And you can see that's a pretty hard edge. The easiest thing to do to make it look a little bit more natural, and you'll be surprised how natural it looks, because the motion of the water adds the illusion of reality here. So let us change the mask feather to be, we only need to change the Y value, and we'll make it about 6 pixels. And if you look, now that value, now that edge is a little softer. And so let's do a quick preview of the duck just floating there. And believe it or not, it's the camera moving, not the duck, but it looks like the duck is rising and lowering a bit in the water. But that's fine, especially since we're going to have motion of the duck swimming from screen right to screen left. It won't be apparent to the viewer that that's what's happening. So that's enough of our preview, really. I've turned off audio, by the way, in our preview because this tutorial is not about audio. All right, so let's go back to the first frame. And we will set a position keyframe. So I'll just select the layer of the duck. We'll hit P. And I'll just click a keyframe right at point 0 in the timeline. And then at the end of the timeline, 10 seconds in, I will move the duck along the x-axis. And we'll back it up a bit, maybe to there. And now we have it look like the duck is swimming a bit. Now, unless the duck is made out of titanium and ballasted like a submarine, it's going to bob a bit. And you would assume that an inflatable duck of that size would pretty much be taken by both the wind and the water. So this is a fairly unnatural bit of action here. But the speed looks about right. So let's see if we can kind of give it a natural bob. To do that, we will once again open a window in After Effects. This time we will open the Wiggler window. And I will select both the position keyframes. It's important to have all the position keyframes selected. And when they are selected, they are blue. When they're not selected, they are gray. So you can select all the position keyframes by clicking the position parameter over here on the left side of the timeline. Now I will go into the Wiggler. And I will apply it to the spatial path. I want it to be smooth because when you're in the water, you bob pretty gently. Dimensions will leave all independently. The frequency is where it gets tricky. It turns out that in the ocean, if the seas are fairly calm, which they clearly are in this image, the dominant wave, pretty much the up and down is a second or two. Let's say it's 2 seconds. And this is a frequency of 5 iterations per second. We don't want that. We want the frequency to be only half per second, meaning 1 every 2 seconds. And the magnitude, we should only apply this to the Y. We want the duck to bob up and down. And the magnitude, since it's a total of 1080, will give it about a possibility of variation of about 20. And you'll see what happens as soon as I hit apply. So we got new keyframes. And the Y value changed at each of the keyframes. And so the duck kind of bobs up and down and up and down. And it kind of looks natural. And if any one of these keyframes didn't look natural, we could just go in and edit it independently. So I could take this keyframe here, Q to it, and just move it to be a little more up than it was previously. And I can change this one to be a little more down. And I can change the first if I wanted to. So I don't know what I moved my mask by accident. So let's make sure that doesn't happen again. We don't want to move our things by accident. So the mask in the background will lock. I'll just click the little lock icon here so I can't accidentally screw that up. So now it looks like the duck is kind of cruising along happily. The other thing a duck would do is it would rock back and forth. And so as it's going up, it would kind of lean backwards, and as it's going down, it would kind of lean forwards. So we have that value as part of the y value. So the initial y value was 393. If you look here. And so what we want to do is we want to set the rotation to be an expression. So I will set the rotation to be an expression by selecting that parameter, going into animation, and selecting add expression. And now the value, the parameters will turn red, and I have the ability to add a value, a formula in here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to expose as well. I'll hold down the Shift key and hit P, and I will say the rotation, I'll take the pick whip and point it at the y value. Now I don't want the rotation to be exactly what the y value is, transform position 1. I want it to be transform position 1 minus 393. So that kind of zeroes out. So it's 0 degrees rotation at the beginning. And so if y is greater than 393, the rotation will be clockwise, and the duck will be looking up. And if it is less than 393, it'll be negative, and the duck will be pointing somewhat down. So let's see what happens when we hit play with this new formula as our expression. And you'll see the duck is kind of up and down. Whoa, that's pretty dramatic. You know what? That's a little dramatic. So I might tweak the formula a little further. So I might say it's minus 393. I'll put the whole value in parentheses. After calculating that, then I'll just divide it by 2. Say only do it half as much. And now it's not nearly as dramatic, but it looks a little more natural. I could divide it by 3 as well if I wanted, but this looks pretty good. To change the formula, I just click in it, and I change the value. We'll cover expressions in more depth in a later tutorial, but for now, just kind of follow along with my keystrokes and understand that not every parameter has to be changed in After Effects by setting keyframes. You do have the option of creating an expression. So now we have a pretty natural animation going, and the compositing looks fairly realistic. So since the duck is in water, although it's far out and it's pretty rough water, it's not like a mirror lake, there's a decent number of waves, you would still see some reflection. So how would we do a reflection? The best way to do that would be to flip the duck vertically, and to do that you would go into you would duplicate this layer, and we'll just put it on top for now. And I will change the scale. I will unlink the x and the y values, and I'll change y to negative 35. So now what I have is the duck flipped vertically, but in the exact same position as the original. And we probably don't want that. We want to change its position. So I want to shift every Y value down. Again, what I can do is I can cue to any keyframe. So I'll cue to one in the middle here so you can see. And then with all the keyframes selected, I can adjust a parameter. And so I'm going to adjust Y. Now notice the rotation is changing because I've changed Y, and Y is based on a Y value of 393, not 516. So what I will do for rotation of this little guy here is quite simply say my formula is going to be different. So for my rotation, I'm just going to say make it the rotation delete the other formula first, my mistake. So I'll select all, hit delete, and then I will use the pick whip to say make the rotation equal the other duck image's rotation. And once I click out of it, you'll see that it doesn't kind of mimic it, it does mimic it. That looks pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. Now the problem is you don't want to see the whole damn duck. You only want to see part of the duck. We already have the mask that we need cut. So I will duplicate the mask layer, bring it to the top, and it will cover up the duck, obviously. And I will now tell the duck, I will say, use that layer above you as a track matte and use its alpha channel, which is the mask we drew, as your matte. And now you will see that the duck is exactly, let me fix this by the way, is exactly cut off where the other duck starts showing up. Now what I can do is adjust the Y even more precisely. Select all the position keyframes and I will bring the Y up, and that looks much more natural, except for the fact that that's one hell of a perfect reflection. But it looks convincing, and everybody's happy. So what we will do now is we'll make this look a little more convincing. So I will change the mode in which the ducky shows on the water to an overlay and see what that looks like. And then I will change its transparency, so now I'm seeing some of the waves through it, so it looks more natural. I will change the transparency from 100% of the new reflection duck to 50%. Now let's make it 20% or 30%. There we go. And then what I will do to make it seem more natural is I will blur it just a bit. I'll choose a Gaussian blur, and I will set the blurriness to about 20. Let's make it about 40. And there you go. Could even make it more. Yeah, make it 80, and it feels a bit right. And that is how you composite a duck without drawing a lot of mattes, without doing a lot of hand painting, without setting a lot of keyframes. In fact, we only set, in this whole thing, we only set 2 keyframes. From that, we used the wiggler to create additional keyframes, and then we used expressions for everything else. And that is how you do a simple composite in Adobe After Effects.